Hi, Abe.
Hey, how's
How
it
are
going, Deanna?
you? Good. Thanks
Good.
so much for joining me. Go ahead, blow that smoke right at the
See,
camera.
now that we're hey, that's what I do.
I know, that's okay. I thought it would make a good uh, intro. Uh,
I'll just wait the whole time. Don't worry
that,
about it. Oh, you can't forget who you're talking to.
I can't. It's really nice to see you. And I had a great
Yeah, it's good
time.
seeing you too.
Thanks. I had a great time driving around the other day and catching up. You're still the same guy. You're still that like same 15, 16-year-old, smart, kind, considerate, nice guy. It was really nice to spend the day with you.
Yeah, it's part of the problem. I haven't changed at all.
You are great. I love it. I really like seeing you. And I know you have a pretty crazy life story, so go ahead and tell all of our viewers and tell me, and don't leave out anything or do leave out things, whatever works for you. We want to hear it.
It'll be slightly edited.
Slightly edited.
Yeah, yeah, my
Go
name's
ahead.
Abe Krasko. I'm a tattoo artist from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I've known Deanna since we were in high school. So she's seen some crazy stuff with us.
It was fun.
Um, yeah, we had some fun times. Not always, but
Yeah.
mostly.
Well, it was fun for me because I was more of an innocent bystander, and you guys are all great
Right.
people. So even all the hell you raised when you were young, I still think you were really great people. Uh, I don't judge.
I think I think most of us were pretty good. We just, were in bad or hard situations.
Yeah,
Stuff got crazy.
exactly. And I've yet to meet any man or woman that didn't do crazy shit when they were 15, 16, 17. Uh,
Yeah, I mean that's part of being a teenager, part of
it,
growing up.
it is,
get,
and the
get it
fact
out of your system.
exactly the fact that even more than half of us are still alive, I think, is a testament uh, to a lot. We can do the shit we did, and we're still here.
Well, it definitely makes you appreciate those of us that are still around.
It
Because so
really
many of us
does.
didn't make it all the way.
No,
You
no.
know.
Mm-mm. Yeah. So, Abe, you're from Albuquerque. You notice my background here. I threw up a Route 66 wallpaper because
Right?
that really seems to be a theme. So many of you guys grew up right off Central, right near the graveyard, right at UNM. I'm guessing that had a lot to do with all the crazy shit.
Uh, yeah. I mean, um, growing up in the neighborhood I did was a lot of diversity, a lot of crazy kind of stuff going on. Um, Most of the time I spent like a block or two right off of Central, so you get bored and you're not doing stuff right.
Yeah, yeah, you weren't exactly like going outside to the playground. You're going outside to Yale Park and the
Right, right.
the
You guys have
the
mentioned Yale Park before, which was,
this.
pretty crazy times.
No kidding, no kidding. Okay, well, I'll stop distracting you. Start at the beginning, Abe. Tell us all about you and your family.
So, well, how far back you want to go? You want to go
I,
to
I want to hear
where I was
about your
born, my parents, all that
yeah.
stuff?
I want to hear about your parents, where they were from, and how they ended up in
Okay.
Albuquerque.
So my dad, he volunteered for Vietnam so he wouldn't get drafted. Um, my mom was partying San Francisco, Golden Gate Park. Um, Her story's a little crazier. My dad pretty much went to Nam, came back, and went to California looking for the hippies, summer of love, whole 9 yards. My mom, on the other hand, she was uh, she was dating Pigpen from the Grateful Dead, hanging out with everybody from San Francisco before they got big and popular, uh, and that was unpopular with her parents. So they kept putting her in reform school, and so she kept finding someone newer and crazier to date,
Wow.
which culminated in her marrying one of the original Hells Angels guys.
Oh
Um,
my.
she, yeah, it was crazy times for her. She had two kids with him. They used to live on the compound, Sonny Barger's hanging out, all the Hells Angels guys. Um, but as you can imagine, wasn't great times for my mom. She was kind of property of the club. Um, the the problem with that is when she wanted to leave, is they wanted to keep the kids. So she had two kids with this guy Red, my half brother, half sister, and basically after enough time, she had to make the decision, and she ended up leaving those two kids. And
Is
the Hells
this
Angels
these?
were like, "Hey,
Yeah. I'm just wondering,
what's
like,
that?
we're talking late 60s, early 70s. When were your siblings born?
This is this is mid '60s.
Okay. All
This
right. So,
this is my siblings are probably 3, 4, 5 years older than me,
okay.
give or take. I was,
So,
I was born in '71, so this is mid '60s. Yeah.
mid
Um,
60s.
so when my mom finally leaves, they're like, "These are HA kids. They're staying, and you need to get out." So she's kind of like hiding out in Northern California, working little restaurants, doing whatever. That's when she meets my dad because he's hitchhiking, looking for the hippies. She's a hippie. They fall in love. Um, so whatever happened in between that, we'll fast forward to what is it, '69. They end up going to Altamont Speedway for the Rolling Stones concert. Um, take a good amount of drugs, acid, whatever. Um, and if you know the story of Altamont, it turned into a big mess. The Hells Angels showed up to work security, and my mom's freaking out because she's like, they're gonna figure out who I am, and then the stabbing happens. You guys can look it up, Google it, um, and basically turns into a riot. And they call the National Guard in, and the helicopters come in, and so my mom's freaking out, Hells Angels. My dad's freaking out, military. Um,
Oh no. Oh no.
basically, that was the end of the summer of love,
That was
you
the
know,
end of.
uh,
Well, that was the
of
concert
the
that changed
hippie
history.
California movement. Yeah, it was definitely the concert that changed it.
Yeah. Everything
Um,
went from peace and love to suddenly dark and angry.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I guess reality of the world set in a little bit. um, so they bailed out of California and went to Canada, to like Vancouver, Canada, some island, little. I guess it was like a Indian reservation, and they were letting all the hippies live there. So this would be like 1970.
Okay.
Um, and so I was conceived in Canada. My parents they decided they were going to have a baby. It was going to be like their hippie love baby. They stopped doing drugs. They went all vegetarian. They did the whole, Earth Mother, whatever kind of bullshit. And I guess at some point it was freezing cold, and my mom's from California, and she's like, "Fuck this, we need to go back to California." So I was conceived in Canada, but born in Boulder Creek, California, which is like near Santa Cruz, way up in the mountains.
Okay. Okay.
My dad delivered me. I was born at
No
home
shit.
in a cabin.
No
Yeah, there's all these
shit.
hippie pictures of me popping out. Yeah, they had to
Really?
drive down. Yeah, they had to drive down to town to get a birth certificate, like show the baby to the doctor. Like, yeah,
No
this
shit.
is him.
Wow. Wow. That's pretty
Um,
old school.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I have a friend of mine, really old friend, that was actually born basically the same way, like a year before I was. Um, and he's still having problems getting like passports and shit because like the birth
No
certificate wasn't like verified.
Really?
Yeah, because goddamn hippies having us at home. And then they named us a bunch of stupid shit. Because
I
my
love
name's
your name.
Abrasha. It's not
I
not
love
Abe.
your name.
Abrasha means Abraham in like Russian or Ukrainian, so that's how I get Abe out of it. Which
Okay.
is a whole other story of shortening my name, so it was easier to deal with.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess all the hippies were leaving California, and they're going to wherever is the most remote place, which New Mexico fits the bill. So
Do, do
I
you know
was
it was
like
that just
one or
a
two.
lot of hippies came to New Mexico at that point, like a
Oh
lot.
yeah, yeah, it was a big thing. I mean, there was a
Okay.
whole like crazy yogi commune that they joined, and some of those places are still around up there. Um, I mean, I vaguely remember it from when I was a kid, but it was whatever. Um, but yeah, we moved to Cuesta, New Mexico, which is about as far away from every fucking thing as you can get. Um, they did the whole off-grid hippie thing. We had, you know, horses and chickens and goats, and my mom made fucking goat cheese, and you know, my dad worked up in all the ski resorts doing, building condos for, Angel Fire and Eagle Nest and Red River or whatever, because all that shit was just starting up there, and all the hippies were just starting to move in. The locals, they were kind of so-so with it.
Yeah.
But I was young. I don't remember a whole lot of it. I remember Cuesta, and then eventually, for whatever reason, we moved to Taos. And you know, that was kind of a little bit of culture shock because I'd just been living pretty much off grid, off the woods. And then we're living, not that Taos is urban, but it's a little bit more of a town, and I'm getting
Yeah.
more to like school age, so I'm having to deal with like people. And then, that has its own story. Eventually, we ended up in Albuquerque, and I've been here since, you know, second grade, last part of first grade, second grade. So, and that's when I
It,
started meeting some of our friends.
yeah. It wasn't easy for you though in Taos. Like you started school there, uh, pretty much from
Oh
like an
yeah, that
outsider,
was crazy.
not
Yeah, I mean,
welcomed.
the first school that I remember going to in Taos was maybe like 4 rooms. They didn't even have a bell. They still rang the fucking school bell, and I'm pretty sure I was like one of the only white kids that went there at the time, and I wasn't warmly accepted by the local
Really?
kids. Um, yeah, just stupid shit like you know not wanting to play with me, so I'm playing by myself, and then they ring the school bell and I don't hear it, and they all go back inside, and basically when I
Yeah.
come in and I get in a bunch of trouble, they're all laughing at me. I didn't know nothing about social standards or racism
Yeah.
or reverse racism or anything. I was just like, man, you guys are dicks. And then
Right.
some point halfway through first grade, I think we ended up moving. So immediately I was like thrown into another school when we moved to
Oh no.
Albuquerque, which
What
again
school was
is
that?
like Bandelier
Hmm.
Elementary. Um, I don't think we drove by it the other day, but it's right up there off of Gerard, and it's pretty nice neighborhood. But we were living basically over on Gerard, like right off of Gibson, so pretty much the curve. But I was too young to even understand like any of that shit. We just went from living in Taos to living in some apartment building, and now I've got a whole new group of kids that are like maybe not like the same kind of shit they were giving me, but kind of like who's this vegetarian hippie kid with a weird fucking name, and there was a
Oh,
whole
that sucks.
new crowd of kids to deal with. And the class was even bigger. So
There
immediately I
was
knew
more of
that
them.
like I yeah, there's a whole bunch more of them, but
I
immediately I
know.
knew that like I didn't like going to school. It was a pain in the ass. you
Didn't fit
know,
you.
I mean, I didn't like doing the lessons, but I also didn't like the social part of it. I didn't like dealing with all the kids and just all the crap. Especially you get the hippie parents to give you the hippie name, and that's just one more thing for kids to fuck with you about.
Were your
um,
parents still living like hippies at this point? Your mom still packing you like a lunch of
yeah, I mean,
tofu or something?
we were still basically doing the vegetarian thing. So I'm watching everyone else eat their, school lunch or whatever, and I'm getting the same peanut butter and fucking bark for lunch, whatever kind of multi whole grain shit it was.
Okay.
So it definitely, makes you feel more of an outsider
Sure.
every step.
Sure.
And at this point, my parents are still together, but now they're living in Albuquerque in an apartment, a little bit more urban. And eventually, they ended up getting divorced pretty quick after that. They moved back to Albuquerque, and I think they both got exposed to kind of the party lifestyle that they had been used to before they did the whole hippie, vegan, vegetarian thing. I don't
So
think
all the
vegan
drugs
even
and
existed back then.
no, but all the
Yeah,
drugs and alcohol they were avoiding was now right there.
yeah, you're trying to avoid all that influence, and you move to Albuquerque, and it's going to be there. um, so yeah, I mean, eventually, I'd say second, third grade. I don't remember exactly. They ended up getting divorced, and that was a whole different experience. Again, changed schools.
I
I think
know.
I went to Bandelier for like a year and a half, and then had to bail schools, meet a whole new crowd of kids.
Oh no.
Um, I think I went to like 4 or 5 different elementary schools over the period between fifth grade once my
Really?
parents got divorced. Um, so yeah, I made it just kind of a pain in the ass. And then we lived in a couple of spots, and my mom would like move in with a boyfriend. At some point, we were living like in the South Valley, and she was trying to drive me to Bandelier, and it takes like 45 minutes to get to school, and half the time I'm missing school because she can't get me there, and that's affecting all kinds of stuff.
Everything.
Um, I think eventually that led me to get into a bunch of trouble going to Bandelier. I ended up going to Bandelier, and then I went to Monte Vista. Towards the end of Bandelier, I started getting into trouble. By Monte Vista, getting moved around and parents getting divorced, I don't know, I was angry, was frustrated. At some point, I got in so much trouble at Monte Vista, I had my own desk in front of the principal's office.
Oh no.
So,
You were that guy.
yeah, yeah, my teacher didn't even want to deal with me.
Oh, there's
I don't know
always
what
one
the
of
hell
you
I
guys.
did. Yeah,
No. But I
um,
could.
I was I was really good friends with the principal and his secretary. I probably had a desk there for like 6 months until like the next
Really?
grade. Yeah,
To the next
and then
grade.
yeah, probably about like I think in fifth grade, my mom pulled me out of there and tried to move back up north
Oh no.
and put me in another school
Oh
up north,
no.
and it was the exact replay of the first school I'd been in. I was like the
It's
only
just.
white kid. I didn't know anyone there. No one wanted to talk to me, play with me. That lasted a couple of weeks, and then I pretty much wasn't going there. Eventually, it didn't work out up there. We ended up moving back here, so I ended up going back to Monte Vista to finish up, which, it just was so many different spots, and we had probably lived in 3 or 4 different houses the whole time, maybe 5 houses
Yeah.
by the time I was out of elementary school. Like just
None of
no real stable everywhere.
none of those were in good neighborhoods either. It's just kind of a
Oh
hard life
no,
for you and
no.
your no.
I mean, I don't think you understand how poor you are until you're not poor.
Really.
Um,
Really.
yeah, my mom was, you know, she was a great lady, and she tried her best, but um, she was single mom, late '70s, early '80s. She didn't really have like job skills, so she cleaned houses, and she did odd jobs, maintenance, did painting. She was an artist also, so she kind of did some art, but it wasn't really anything that she ever made money off of.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I never realized that I was in bad neighborhoods. I just grew up.
Just grew
Um,
up.
as you get older, you start going to your friends' houses, and you're like, hey, this is cool. You have a color TV, you know.
And food.
I think up until up until high school, I just had a black and white TV. You know, it was like kind of cool to go stay at someone's house and go check out like color TV or cable TV or VCRs or any of that kind of cool '80s shit that was happening. But you don't really know when you're a kid. You know, it's just normal.
You don't know.
It is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I would say once my parents got divorced, both of them lived in like the university neighborhood, the university ghetto kind of area. Lots of split houses, little apartments, lots of transient people, lots of party houses, lots of crazy shit going on. And again, this is all, within 2-3 blocks off of Central, regardless of whether I was staying with my mom or my dad. They just were both in that neighborhood. So yeah.
Just out of curiosity, do you think, because we're finding a lot of single moms that moved to that neighborhood, do you think that was just the affordable place to live in Albuquerque at that time if you're a single mom? Or
yeah, I mean there was a lot of cheap student housing, lots of apartment buildings, and pretty accessible to stuff. There was other cheap places to live, but if you didn't have any other connections, like at least living up there, you could go to the Ghetto Smith. You could go to there's whatever Walgreens up there and a bunch of little shops. Lots of restaurants. And back in the day, there was a few more bars back there that my parents partied at too and took me to all the time. So I halfway grew up in a bar.
Which were their bars? Were they like a Jack's Lounge couple, or where was their bar? Central.
So the original one I remember was it was called Okie Joe's. It used to be on University and Central.
Okay.
It's where that 7-Eleven is now, and
okay.
It was like an old biker bar, old hippie bar. Had some cool tables. And then there used to be a spot kind of right across from UNM called the Fat Cat.
Fat Cat.
Eventually it was called Fat Cat.
What? Oh,
the Fat Cat.
What? The Fat Chance.
Fat
Okay.
Cat. Yeah.
Yes.
But eventually it turned into this place called Sprockets, and I don't even know what it is now. But yeah, I mean, it was another kind of hippie biker bar kind of place, and regardless of which parent had me, they pretty much like dragged me in there for whatever. They'd go have beers with their buddies, and I'd sit there and eat popcorn and whatnot, drink Shirley Temples or whatever.
Exactly.
So I got older, then I started
eat cherry,
drinking beers,
Oh, really? Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It was kind of cool because I got to sit there and watch TV and shit. But later on in life, you're like, man, I spent a lot of time in bars as a kid.
Well, and that's why I asked which bar. Because we all did. That was just a thing in the 70s, and New Mexico allowed the
70s,
parents.
80s, you just took your kid to the bar, no big deal.
Yeah, they sat around and bullshitted, and we listened to what they talked about.
And then, eventually you fast forward a bunch of years, and I'm like, I'm able to go to the bar and drink because everybody already knows me, and, I throw out a little bit of a beard, and, every now and then I run into someone that I know that's using a fake ID or something, and we're like, I won't stay if you don't stay,
Okay. So that started early on. Anyway, I didn't mean to get you off track. I just find it interesting because all of us, our parents kind of had their neighborhood bar, which just sort of feeds into the story of how each of us grew up.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, kind of normalized hanging out in that kind of scene, I guess.
Yeah. Did you meet any of our friends at Monte Vista or Bandelier?
Yeah, I mean, you did a podcast with Tommy Bottoms. I think me and him met at Bandelier, maybe like second grade or something.
Okay.
Of course, I ended up moving schools and lost touch with him and didn't even see him again probably till like high school or whatever. maybe a few people that we knew in elementary school, but like I think most of the people I that we shared friends with was probably like middle school, like when I
Okay.
started going to Jefferson mid school.
Okay.
Um, that would be well. You did a podcast with Marty. I met Marty there at Jefferson, and pretty much anybody else that was part of that crowd. I think around then is when I met like Partain and JP Jones and some of those guys. Just because those I don't even know, like just some of the parties, like some of the mid school parties we went to. There was like a lot of crossover between some of that early friends group. Um, Also, we were all kind of discovering like our own music. I think right about then, early '80s, is when a lot of the metal and thrash really started like coming into our lives. Maybe a little punk rock. Even in Albuquerque, being pretty sheltered. It's kind of 2 years, 3 years behind everything. But yeah, I remember by the time I was in mid school, meeting a lot of our friends, we were all starting to rock the heavy metal T-shirts a lot more. I mean, I had been rocking that shit forever because my parents were pretty cool, and I know some of my friends were like, not able to do that.
No.
I was showing you that one picture I got. I was maybe second or third grade. I'm wearing a Kiss T-shirt
Kiss T-shirt. It was like
for my school picture.
your school picture.
Everybody else was
Yeah.
wearing their little '70s button-up, whatever, and I'm like shows up in my heavy metal T-shirt, and I'm like, yeah, rock and roll. Um,
It started early
but yeah,
for
that was
you.
probably mid school is probably where I started meeting some of our crowd, and I started getting a little more serious about getting into trouble. It wasn't just like sitting in front of the principal's office. Now I was going to Yale Park and being able to get drugs for kids that were not allowed to go down there. But for me, walking around Yale Park was like, hey, I know half these people, and some of them I knew through my parents, my mom. For anyone that doesn't know, Yale Park was basically across from, it was on campus of UNM, but it was like right on Central, and it was basically like the hippie park. You could go buy, sell pretty much whatever you wanted. Weed, coke, speed, grass, fucking, acid, lots of psychedelics. I mean, I saw pretty much every kind of weird shit go on there. So, but
Early.
that was kind of, yeah. I mean, I was kind of a dorky kid. I wasn't like I was dorky, and I was like kind of an outsider because a lot of kids had like gone to the same set of schools for a long time and had known each other forever, and socioeconomic too. I was kind of an outsider, but a lot of those kids, like I said, weren't allowed to go down to Yale Park. And as soon as I figured out that, they would buy some acid from me, and I could go to Yale Park and spend my lunch money on acid and sell it at Jefferson, and um, that was probably the start of me realizing that that if I hustled, I could probably make some money. But yeah, I mean that was kind of the beginning of things getting kind of crazy, and me just not giving a shit about school anymore.
You were walking home too, right across UNM campus. Like you went to Jefferson, and then you had to get back home across UNM, which led to you and the campus cops having more than a few confrontations.
Yeah, I mean, at some point I was riding the school bus, and then we got some shit on the school bus, and they kicked us off. So I would just ride my BMX or skateboard. But yeah, I think probably the first time I actually got arrested was on campus over at UNM. We were walking home from school, and I don't know, we fucking graffitied up some bathroom and some bulletin boards on campus, and we thought we were pretty cool. We were gonna leave. Cops pull up. They're about to let us go, and they're like, you hear over the radio, they're like, yeah, one of the suspects is wearing this, yellow T-shirt, and I look over, and my homie's wearing a bright yellow Black Cat Fireworks T-shirt. And after that, it was pretty much all over. we didn't really get in a whole lot of trouble, but they cited us for like vandalism or something and made our parents come pick us up. Um, Side note to that is my dad comes and picks me up, and then goes to the fucking bar, takes me to the bar. So, hey, yeah, my kid got in fucking trouble today, blah, 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 and everyone's laughing at
Takes
me,
you to
but yeah, it
takes
was a
you to the
different world
bar.
back then. Yeah, school was pretty annoying. I spent as much time trying to get kicked out of school as anything. Um, they would put me in like special ed for behavior problems, and then I would test out of it, and they would try and put me in, gifted classes, but I'd get in fights with all the kids in there, and really all I wanted to do was just figure out something else to do with my life. But yeah, I got into music and going to concerts right around then too, so that was kind of like one of the outlets that I had, and I started drawing quite a bit in middle school. Um, I'd be sitting behind someone. They'd be wearing AC/DC, Iron Maiden. Every band back then had a really cool, distinct like graphic logo. Um, and instead of doing any homework, I would just try and recreate those lettering styles, and eventually you try and start redrawing some of the more complex shit. Fucking Eddie, all that shit. And then you got people that are like, hey, can you draw this shit on my notebook? And so I was like, hey, I mean, I never really thought about art as a career, but like it gave me the opportunity to like have something to share with people. People were like, hey, you want to hang out and you can draw on my fucking notebook? I'll smoke a bowl with you or something. I was like, hey, all right,
Oh,
that's cool.
yeah.
And I still never considered art as a career, because my mom had been an artist for my whole life, and I don't know if she just didn't apply herself or put herself into it, but she never made money off of art. So I was always like, you can't make money as an artist. Not that I had any like career goals other than maybe selling dope, but yeah, like I think Jefferson was like the only school that I ever went to like all 3 years, and like didn't actually move. I like my mom had the same place for most of it, and I actually was able to like establish like a few friendships that like I mean have lasted even till now. But yeah, middle school was kind of a trip. And then high school we went to Highland. That's when I really decided that I was not really wanting to participate in the whole deal. Um, the whole social part of it, and then just the whole academic part of it, I was just wasn't even there for it. Um, and that's when I started meeting you guys. Started meeting like a little bit more varied of a crowd. Things got pretty crazy in high school. um, we definitely got way more into like harder music. You know, a lot more antisocial punk rock kind of stuff. Started developing a lot more opinions about that kind of social political kind of shit, and started partying really hard. I was still kind of long haired heavy metal nerd when I went to high school, but I was starting to definitely like escape reality quite a bit more. Starting to do a lot more extracurricular substances. um, and I was starting to get a little bit more into the selling drugs, because I just was always so broke and poor, and that was like the one thing that was like kind of accessible, being on the half and half on the cusp of like regular society, and then being on the cusp of kind of what my mom was into. She was partying a lot, and you know I was meeting people that she was partying with, and as I got older, they were starting to like They're like, hey, yeah, you're cool, we'll work with you a little bit, blah blah. So I'd say the first year or two of high school, I was kind of did my thing. But probably by like second year of high school, uh, drugs became a big part of the scene. I was going to as many like shows and concerts as I could, and um, we were experimenting with pretty much every substance you can imagine. Um, and me, I was always bad because I like to experiment with mixing them all. Even in high school. Um, and I mean, the crowd that we were with, there was some pretty hardcore shit going on with some of the drugs and some of the situations we were involved in.
Well, I think it was the time too. You're talking about early, mid, and late '80s. There were a two couple blocks off of Central Avenue and Yale Park. I think that we were just exposed to so many drugs. If you talk to people from other parts of the world, they did not have exposure to that much.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that Albuquerque was exclusive to that because I did end up traveling around quite a bit in high school, and I was able to find scenes like ours in other cities, but Albuquerque definitely, for the size of the city, the intensity of some of the scenes were equal to like major cities, which was
Well, major cities, Los Angeles usually.
yeah, exactly. I mean, you would go out to cities like that, and you'd have comparable stories to living in East
Right.
LA or Compton or Watts or something. I mean, I've had many experiences in my adult life comparing stories with people that grew up in slums and ghettos of like major cities, and very similar stories to what Albuquerque was for being like a tenth of the size. You know what I mean? So I think,
Just smaller, but it's the same.
yeah, the concentration and the intensity of what was going on was pretty magnified. But I think that's an Albuquerque thing in general. People cling on to something and they take it like all the way. um,
That's for sure.
but yeah, I mean, uh, we were talking when we were driving around about how eventually my mom was kind of getting kind of out of control, and my dad, I mean, he lived in Albuquerque until I was a teenager, but he was weekend dad. He'd get me every other weekend, and uh, he was cool and all, but I felt that I was maybe just kind of getting in the way of whatever he was trying to do. His party scene, his
Was
girlfriends, whatever.
was his
Um,
was he a
but,
drinker? Like that was he's a drinker. He just wanted to be
um,
in a bar all the time.
yeah, he had his crowd of friends that partied, and like he was never like really bad, but uh, I think he was ready for me just to be grown the fuck up. You know what I mean? Just like he didn't have a lot of time for me. Um, and anytime I needed something, it was always kind of like a pain in the ass to get anything out of him. Um, he knew that my mom was struggling and shit, and he just kind of did his thing. Once they were divorced, I was just kind of like a obligation, I guess.
Well,
Um,
that's too
but like I
bad.
said, they both lived.
Doesn't make
They
for a
both
very
lived
good
in the same
childhood.
order. Yeah.
They
Um,
lived.
they were both in the university neighborhood, so like pretty much any time I was with him, I just spent my time wandering around as much as I could. I'd just go sleep at his house until my mom, because usually if my mom sent me to my dad, she would go party, so she wasn't around. Um, so sometimes I'd even go, sneak back to my mom's house and get shit that I needed because we were only a couple of blocks away from each other. Um, but yeah, I mean, whatever. I'm over it. They tried. Once you're a parent, you figure out how fucking hard it is to do that shit.
Ain't that the
Um,
truth?
yeah,
Ain't that
I
the
mean,
truth?
it was a crazy childhood and whatever, but I lived through it. So I don't really. my mom's been dead for years, and like I don't really talk to my dad that much. Just kind of, hey, how you doing? Happy holidays. Hope you're alive. That was probably the extent of our relationship. Um, but yeah, my mom was. By the time I was in high school, you could tell my mom was pretty much done being a parent. She had like all these brothers and sisters that she helped raise, and then she had like her two kids with her ex husband, the Health Angels dude. And then, by the time I was like 14 or 15, she was just pretty much in party mode. She was just kind of like checked out. Um, and so that led to some like crazy living situations and whatever. Um, that's that's when we moved to High Street, like High and Central, High and Gold. Um, and this is before they even tried to clean that neighborhood up, so it was even worse than living by UNM. I mean, there's no stores down there. There was like no businesses. Um, there was hookers and drug dealers walking up and down the street. We lived in when I was in high school, I was living in old railroad property. That whole part of Albuquerque is just all old railroad housing. Um, we had uh, we had this apartment with steam heat. We had old school radiators. Um, like some of the light switches were like the double push button ones with the brass bases. I mean, it was all like original equipment from the 20s or whenever they built that place, maybe the 30s. Um, and it was pretty far from school, so I had to use like friends' addresses so I could still go to Highlands because I tried to go to Albuquerque High and just I didn't know anyone, didn't fit in, and that was a disaster. Um, so I would use a friend's address up on Ridgecrest to go to Highlands, and I was living down on High Street, and you know, my mom was like getting pretty into doing speed again, and she was like pretty
Oh no.
pretty messed out, and um, sometime towards like the end of high school, she lost the car, so we didn't even have a car to drive. So I was pretty much like fully independent as far as my transportation went by then. I mean, I pretty much had been since middle school, but even like going back home after being out with my friends for a while and coming home and there's no groceries there. There's no because she doesn't have a car. She can't go get anything. So she just basically went into party mode. Um, Eventually, we ended up losing the house and the car, and that was pretty much whatever 1989 would be when I was supposed to be a senior in high school. Um,
Ooh.
and so I pretty much didn't even go back to school. I was like, I need to figure out where to live. I need to figure out like how to make some money, how to eat. I'd already been working all kinds of like odd jobs and small jobs because there was no other way for me to survive. Even you know selling drugs at Highland. Buying buying bags of weed and rolling up joints and selling dollar joints to kids, and you know getting strips of acid, and buy a couple of hits for a couple of bucks and go to school and sell them for $5 each. And um, I think it was probably my 60th birthday. My mom was like, here, I don't really have much for your birthday, but I'll let you guys have the house party, and here's a couple of bottles of tequila, and I'll go stay at my
Oh my.
boyfriend's. Which was cool. I mean, at the time, we were all partying and shit, but like that
Yeah.
was kind of like the standard of,
Yeah.
of what I was dealing with. That was my like sweet 16 was like, here's a couple of bottles of booze. You can invite all your friends over. Don't trash the apartment. And then
I
that kind
would.
of set the
Yeah.
tone for
That's a
the rest of
lot.
high school after that.
It's a lot. Pretty hard to get an education like that. Sound like since you started elementary school, you had other priorities besides going to school.
Yeah, well, I mean, survival. That's a priority.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Exactly.
I got an education. It just wasn't, your academic kind of normal education. um,
Well, I'd agree with that, but all you and yourself, and most all of us as your friends all think that you're kind of a nerd. You've said it yourself several
yeah,
times.
I've always
You're
been kind of
for
a
the
nerd.
guy who got no education. You're the smart one.
I mean, now I'm just a tattoo nerd. Um, that's
Yeah,
all I've
right.
done for the last like 35 years, whatever. But yeah, when we were driving around, I was telling you, um, I came back. We lived in two different apartments in that building at High Street. I don't remember which one it was,
Okay.
but that's where I met. That's where I met my buddy Jay, who was at the time dating my mom. But he was a very like well connected acid dealer, and
Oh no. Oh yeah, I know this story.
yeah, and so me and him started like a little bit of a friendship, and he's like, here, I hear you like to do acid, whatever. Here's a little bit. See if your friends like it. My friends liked it, um, and eventually I figured out that like he was part of like the extended like psychedelic family in California, and he was like a pretty main player. Um, and me and him stayed really good friends even after my mom and him broke up. We we definitely had some adventures together and did a little bit of business together. Uh, but also, I was around my mom, and I met a lot of her friends, and they were really into doing speed, methamphetamines, and shit. So that led me into knowing like meth cooks and um, a lot of old biker dudes. There was a big meth biker kind of scene. You know, met a lot of the local bike club guys. Um, Presidents of clubs, and was exposed to the businesses that we were involved in. Um, and back then, I mean, I'm sure you know the stories. There's several of our friends that were involved with shit where we were employed by some of these guys that had labs, and whether we were picking up stuff for them or delivering stuff for them or transporting something from someplace. They seem to recruit a lot of kids, you know, um, and I was definitely a target of, I was the perfect, target for that type of environment where, hey, you ain't got
Because you're a
much.
nerd
You
kid.
like to get, yeah, you like to get high. You're pretty smart. You want to make some money. Um, and as far as like the powders and shit, I was never really into like uppers, like that kind of scene. I like psychedelics a lot more. But there was money to be made, and there's opportunities, and because of my mom, people trusted me and knew me. So um, that was a lot of my income in high school, was like running around doing that kind of crap.
Man,
Um,
that's a lot. That's a lot of connections for a kid that's like 15, 16,
just
17. All those
just seemed
bikers
normal.
making speed,
Just seemed
all
normal
those
at the time,
bikers making speed in the travel lodges, in these
Yeah,
hotels behind me. That's right.
yeah.
Uh, they
Well, and then
were all,
we'll go into the whole living on High Street. We did the whole this is like mid to late '80s. The whole crack thing was happening. Um, Nobody had ever heard of crack until like the '80s, and I ended up like knowing the basics because all the old bikers and hippies were freebasing. They were smoking coke. Um, so I was on acid. I'd taken a hit or two, and there used to be this little spot, Bob's Fish and Chips, which was like right on High and Central. And I'd met some of the Albuquerque cholos, the gangsters, like whatever. But I went over there one day to grab some food, get a Coke or whatever. And I met my first like real like hardcore like West Coast gangsters. This is right when the Bloods and the Crips were starting to come into town, and we started bullshitting. One thing leads to another. They asked me if I like to do drugs, and I'm like, yeah, I'm fucking high right now, man. I just like hit acid, which they think is like crazy because then they're like, man, doesn't that shit make you insane? And I was like, I don't know, we'll find out. I'm still waiting
In
to
my
find out.
opinion, it's why you're so evolved.
Maybe opened a few doors. But I was talking to them, and they're like, hey, you like to do coke? And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. One thing led to another, and they were trying to figure out how to mass produce crack. And I was like, yeah, that's fucking easy, man. You just water baking soda.
Because it's the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's pre-based. It's just pre-made freebase, It just makes it easier for people. They don't got to cook up their own rocks, So, yeah, we spent, I made friends with these guys, and we spent a week or so teaching them how to make their product and hanging out and, trading dope and trading stories and, So that was part of my education in the 80s, speed labs, making crack, selling acid.
Selling acid.
Well, and this leads back to kind of the music thing too. At some point towards the end of high school and my early adulthood, I was transporting pretty good amounts, and I was going to some big cities, and one of my biggest goals was to like go see shows, go see punk shows, go see metal shows.
You've seen a bunch of good shows.
Led me to some cool opportunities. I got to go
here we go.
I got to go to some cool clubs in New York, and I saw some shows in Jersey and stuff. But we were pretty much into hardcore and getting to go to CBGBs and see like some of the bands that you just never got to see in Albuquerque.
No, at the iconic clubs.
Yeah. I mean, rest in peace, CBGBs. But they used to do these hardcore
matinees.
This is the 90s. This is like late 80s, like maybe early 90s.
Really?
I was going to a lot of shows here and hanging out with people. We had some friends that were like super into music. Go see, and I grew up by UNM, so there was a lot of house parties. So I started getting to see like some of the punk shows like pretty early, like some of the local like new wave and punk kind of bands. And then, by the time I was in high school,
you were just right in the middle of it.
Yeah, I mean, you'd just be walking down the street and like there'd be a house party and you'd hear the music and nobody would stop you from going in. You'd just go hang out,
And No Effects would be playing?
This is probably before that. There used to be some local like college punk rock kind of bands, like late 70s, early 80s. That was probably my first like exposure to like, I don't know, that whole new wave and punk rock kind of sound. Because before then, you just listened to what was on the radio. You heard Led Zeppelin and whatever was the top 40 shit. The Eagles and shit like that. And you look at your like parents' records and shit, so you're listening to like the Beatles and whatever. But yeah, I started seeing some of those house parties and hearing some of those bands and seeing the look, seeing how they're dressing up, and and it was appealing, because they were not trying to fit in; they were trying to not fit in,
Specifically.
I think specifically, yeah. So I got into like, I think like the first like kind of like new wave, kind of like big concert I ever saw, or like, you know, it was rock, but it was kind of on that new wave edge, was the Cars and the
Wow,
Motels.
really?
Yeah, yeah, that
Where
was probably
where was that? That's
late
early. If
70s,
you
early
did
80s.
all your shit so early.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
my dad started taking me to concerts early. Like the first concert I ever saw was Eric Clapton and B.B. King and
Damn.
Muddy Waters. Yeah,
Damn.
that was
Damn.
a
You're
cool
not that
show.
much older than I mean, you're basically the same age as me, and that's pretty
Yeah,
early on
that was
mixed up
probably
and all kinds of shit.
the 70s. And then that was another thing about the music is my dad would take me to a lot of bars, and my mom would also, and they would take me to bars where like, you know, biker bands were playing like old, you know, whatever. My mom was dating a guy that was in a band, and they'd play all over the state, even up in Colorado, and you know, just biker bars. They play Elvis covers and Rolling Stone songs, and they had a couple of originals, and so just seeing live music and stuff was like kind of always there. And I mean, I guess it makes sense with my mom because she was like hanging out in Golden Gate Park with like, you know, the Grateful Dead
Oh
before
yeah,
they were even called the Grateful Dead. You know.
really.
Yeah,
You
one of her
told me
first
she was always
boyfriends was
dating musicians.
yeah, her one of her first like true loves was this guy Pigpen. He was the keyboardist for the Grateful Dead back in the day.
No shit.
Back when they were called the Warlocks before they were ever
Okay.
like the Grateful Dead.
Okay.
So that whole thing ties in, and then, you know, like I said, like even by mid school, you know, we're going to concerts at you know, Tingley Coliseum, and you know, my mom would let me buy a ticket for Black Sabbath, and she would just drop me off, at Tingley, and you know,
Damn.
have fun, you know.
Damn.
So I go get stoned and smoke cigarettes, and this is like mid school, you know. I forget how old you are in mid school, but this is like early '80s, you know. I'm going to all these concerts by myself, you know, Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, fucking Rush, you know, everything you could think of, like as far as '80s, like big concert, stadium rock, you know.
I think so many of us have seen the same concerts, but from the concerts you tell me, I can tell how much further back you were seeing stuff than the average.
Yeah, well,
I know a lot of people saw a lot of shows in Albuquerque, but you talk about ones that are in the 70s.
Yeah. Well, I mean, early '80s, like '70s was stuff my parents were taking me to, and a lot of biker bars and stuff.
Okay.
By the early '80s, I was like seeking out shows on my own. Like I said, I think middle school I saw, you know, I was catching bands before they were getting big too.
oh yeah, you
I know
saw
there's a
somebody
lot
at Johnson Gym.
yeah. I mean, they suck, but Motley Crue, you know, they were cool.
Oh.
They were just they had just gotten done with Too Fast for Love, and Shout at the Devil was like about to come out. So they were pretty early on, you know. It was before they were
Really?
completely
Yeah, that's
completely
an early show.
strip club music, you know.
Yeah, that's pretty early for Albuquerque. The
but yeah, I was
remember that show.
I was right by UNM, so like any kind of concert that was going on over at UNM,
Really?
I'd try and go check it out, you know. Even if it was just
So
local
you got
bands,
the
you know,
house
they used to
party.
be like
Really? And
the
house
Fiestas
parties
over
in the
there at Johnson
Coliseums.
Gym,
Mhm.
and you know, see all the local bands. But yeah, I mean, I would go see anything I could at Tingley, you know. I would
Yeah.
I'd throw a
Yeah.
bunch of acid at Jefferson, and you know, go back to
Buy
Yale
yourself
Park
a
and sell
ticket.
some there. And you know, you used to be able to buy all the tickets at the record stores, you know. So there was like 3 or 4 spots like right by UNM where you could like,
Yeah.
you know, it was like $8,
Yeah, where I'd have to
$10,
ask-
$12.
yeah. In the Heights, you'd have to ask your mom to drive you somewhere. You couldn't
Yeah,
just go
to the
buy
general
'em.
store. Remember the
It
general
was
store?
right there. It was
Yeah, right on
there.
Harvard. So they always
guys
sold
had-
tickets, and they had like all the concert shirts, and you know, that was a cool spot to hang out. But yeah, by high school, that's when like like the hardcore music started hitting Albuquerque that you could go see
Ah,
it. Um,
okay.
there was there was a bunch of kids that I knew from like the neighborhood. This was like fuck, I don't remember, 84, 85. Um, and they drugged me down to the infamous Black Flag show at Casa Armijo, which was like a community center in the South Valley, which I knew the place as a concert place because my mom's boyfriend had played like with his folk music band there, and like last place I'd ever imagine to see a fucking punk show, you know. Um,
But it was just a place to
I
go at that time.
I mean, it's not a place that even had a lot of shows. It just was like I think that they just didn't tell them
Randomly.
who was playing.
Oh,
Like they
really?
didn't know who Black
Okay.
Flag was or whoever else was playing
Okay.
with them. Um,
Okay.
and I didn't. I was barely aware of who they were. I think I'd had a little exposure to them, but you know, like putting names on bands and who did what song was still, you know, still trying to figure it out. But I remember that being
Yeah,
pretty
I haven't
crazy.
got there yet.
Um, I remember the cops coming at some point, and you know, I was like, pretty like fuck, I'm gonna get stranded down here in the South Valley because I don't know where these guys went, and I barely knew them. But then you fast forward to like high school, and you know, you had our buddy Ray Studio,